The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand. We gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise to get what we want. We got to organize.
Good day, good afternoon, and good evening, good people, good comrades, wherever you are in the world. I am Jamilah. I'm here with Evan, and this is the Pantsula Podcast. And we are organizers with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. The objective of the All African People's Revolutionary Party is to organize for a unified socialist Africa. That is the objective. And of course, a unified socialist Africa and practicing scientific socialism, which that is under, is a means to get to world communism. So let's not get that twisted. Socialism is a transitory period to get to communism. So I think, at some point we'll actually do a video or podcast episode or whatever. If you're watching, it's video. If you're listening, it's an audio episode. But I think we'll get into specifics about communism because I think there's still a lot of confusion around that, particularly when it comes to African life. So I think that's pretty crucial. But if one is a reader, a studier of Nkrumah, there will be a little bit more of an understanding around why we as revolutionary Africans do support communism. But that is not what this episode is about. It is about African United Fronts. And I actually was part of a BAP membership meeting earlier today, and that would be an example of an African United Front. So Black Alliance for Peace, which the A-APRP is a member of, and I am part of the New York chapter of BAP. And so we have other folks, part of the East Coast circles that also do, I think, was it Rafiki? It was one of our comrades on the East Coast who also participated in the meeting. I saw him, I was like, oh. So that would be an example, but we'll get more into that. Before we honor our ancestors, I'm saying I, but I do mean we, myself and Evan, do want to be a little candid about this evening. Both of us have been majorly struggling mentally with a lot of things going on in our lives right now. So if, one of us might burst out in tears or, just there might be something that's triggering this episode, is because we are experiencing stuff. I had a major mental health crisis this past week. I don't want to get into specifics around that, but I do want to say, in relation to African United Fronts as a whole and just building communities with other revolutionaries, it's important that we reach out to each other. If we are announcing we're in a crisis, it's important we reach out. And the most important words we can say to someone are 4 words. How can I help? I think saying, or just responding and not checking in. Again, I can only speak for myself, but I think actually checking in, calling or texting, saying, how can I help? I think that is something that's most helpful. I think not responding to it at all is really not helpful. I understand that in a capitalist society in particular, it's hard for us to know how to engage with someone that is experiencing a crisis. But if we are practicing humanism, if we are practicing socialism, we have to struggle with ourselves in order to struggle with how to do that. So please do not leave someone alone and just saying, okay, just engage with them and know that you are hearing them, because you don't know what will happen. So I just really want to put that out there. Yes, the both of us are struggling, but I did want to be even clearer and say I did actually have a crisis during this week. And Evan, you were definitely one of the people who listened, who reached out. And there were other comrades who reached out. I'm not saying, oh, there's only one, but a lot of people do not reach out because it's possible they're scared. It's possible they don't know what to say, so they don't want to hurt people. But I think reaching out is better than not reaching out at all. I also think that it's similar to a funeral, a homegoing ceremony, where people have funerals, but it's not necessarily for the person who's gone. It's so everyone who's still here can reminisce about that person. So I look at how we're trained to engage with someone experiencing a crisis in the same way. The person who is or is not engaging is thinking about, okay, what can I do, as opposed to, okay, how can I give this person autonomy? So saying, how can I help, is a way to give that person autonomy to say, okay, well, yeah, I just need you to listen right now. Or I just wanted to say that to you and open up to you. I don't really need much else right now. So thank you for asking. And then when that person who is experiencing that says that, it then opens up for you to say, well, you know, I am asking, but I really don't have a lot of capacity right now to help you in the way you need, but I can point you to someone else. And that is a more circular, democratic way of doing it, as opposed to assuming, well, this person's hurt right now, they just need cheering up. When you don't know that, you can't make that assumption. So asking how you can help and opening it up and giving, again, that person autonomy, they might say, yeah, you know what, I just need to cheer up right now. Can you come over and we can watch a funny movie? But again, you have given them to space to say that's okay to do, as opposed to you assuming that, well, you know, like I've cheered them up before with a funny movie, you know, it might be okay now, but someone experiencing a massive crisis, that's a whole different situation than someone just being sad. So anyone, you know, if someone comes to you in a massive crisis, please listen to them. Please ask how you can help. And if you do not have the capacity to help them in the way they need, it's okay to say that too, because everyone has their space where, you know, you might be going through something as well. So you're like, wow, this is really heavy for me. Something happened. It's okay. And so I just wanted to open with that because, you know, we're talking about African United Fronts and organizations coming together, but I think United Fronts can also be represented in that way, where communities are building humanistic ways to care for each other when we are in crisis, because we all know capitalism does not care about people in crisis. They want to put meds on everybody instead of being like, hey, you know, there's a reason somebody's experiencing a crisis. So I feel like these are things I've talked about before, in particular with disability and all kinds of things like that. But I think that's really important to say, because I also know that you're experiencing things. I don't know if you have a response to that, but I just really wanted to put it out there in the case, you know, anyone who's listening, anyone who's going through a massive crisis themselves, it's okay. It's very okay. It's okay to, again, tell someone, you know, I don't really have the space to do that. But, you know, giving everybody an opportunity and a space to practice that sort of humanism and community. So, yeah, I don't know if you have anything to say or follow up.
I just want to respond to it. Like you mentioned before, like you mentioned that, like, Jamila was talking about that while she was like, one of the people that was like got in touch with her, and even though I wasn't going through a major crisis like she was going through, I've gone through some, you know, some changes in my life, and that's been really weighing me down. It's got me in a down period. I've been able to get through some things, but like all the other things have been tough to get through. So yeah, again, like, as we mentioned before, as Jamil mentioned in the episode about disability, on the episode of like not fearing the struggle, that there are times where you might feel like you don't have the ability to, like you may think you might not have the ability or the capacity to do something, but again, like some of the principles that we've been mentioning in our podcast and all the podcasts about humanism, collectivism, egalitarianism, that it's okay to listen. It's okay to take that time to. It's okay to take that time to let's say, hey, I'm like as I was saying that you may not have like the spiritual or medical or some combination of both to solve problems. I know you mentioned that this capitalist system has this thing where you want to be the hero. You want like someone like you don't want to be the hero to make like get someone out from that death. And sometimes and you think if something happens, then oh, it's my fault. I didn't do this. I didn't tell him this. And like sometimes like you can't like again like we're all struggling against the system. So sometimes like people have different capacities of what they're going. So again, you have to have the human stability and as we talk about as we're just going to transition to discussing our ancestors, that one of the things is that ancestors, like, we know that the ancestors that we honor, like obviously they didn't have, they've gone through things like prison and torture and so forth, or and or they have family who they maybe not have the same extent of like that direct repression or exploitation and so forth, but they were there to like fight with them to they take it like fight their battles like if they transition or they're not able to take part anymore. And in this case we're honoring from the land Dani, Wadada, Nabudere, and Zondeni Sobukwe, right? From some episodes with comrade Jeffrey. You might be familiar with Wadada Nabudere, who's a African in Uganda who wrote some treatises about imperialism, Pan-Africanism, and so forth, and he worked with pro-African Ugandan revolutionaries against the neo-colonial Ugandan neo-colonists of Ugandan governments. We'll have, and if you see any recent episodes with Jeffrey, we'll have some links to books by him, or if you check out his social media, and also honoring Zondeni Sobukwe, who was the widow of Robert Sobukwe, and one of the things is not only was she fighting alongside to free Sobukwe from imprisonment by the actually apartheid National Front regime and government in Tanzania, South Africa, but also was a nurse and also did the work with political prisoners generally. So, and like again, like even if when you talk about things in regard of fighting for something like Pan-Africanism, for socialism, for against settler colonialism, so forth, that in those moments that for people that were ancestors or elders that we look up to or we like learn so much from, but that you have to understand they were human too. That that's one of the great things that they learned. They learned that from struggle and understand that you're not gonna like do like you might not like you think you hear about some jailbreak or some revolutionary battle or something like that. You think, oh, I can't do that, and then like there might be times where you think, oh, I had a bad day at the slave, or like someone did this, or like not getting along with someone at work or at school or with family, and you think, if I can't handle that, then I can be part of some revolution. But again, like as we go talk more about United Fronts, that it always helps to understand that there are people who are also fighting against forces you, and as an individual who needs that like one thing we talk about in anti-patriotic task forces. One thing we read recently is about forming pods. So like you have a group of people saying, okay, then I'm struggling, I could talk to these people. Then I know that more often than not they're gonna listen. They're gonna let me know that, oh, I can help, I'll send you to this, or I think I can help out, or even if they want to help, as I was saying, like maybe you don't need anything like really like tangible right now. You just need someone just like sit back for like 20 minutes, like to let you talk again. And relates to United Fronts is that when you're facing against capitalism, you're facing against imperialism, you're facing against national oppression and so forth, that like at some points you might think, oh, I just find all the revolutionary movements there, like all I just need to find all the revolutionary movements, or for like in the case of the A-APRP, I need to just find all the revolutionaries that are Nabudere Toureas, and then we'll join together and then fight. But uh, as far as like there's some people who listen to this podcast who before that might not even know there was such thing as an ideology of Nabudere and Toureas, and so doing that might not work. Like it might work if you have like a mass, like millions and millions of people who Africans who are involved, but at this point it might seem a bit heck like this. I guess a strategy that might not work to the best. But the thing is with United Fronts is that you involve the people who you're fighting against. You say, oh, and don't have another feminist terrorist organizations working. Maybe I find someone who they're fighting against like police terror. They're fighting against eviction. They're fighting against land grabs. They're fighting against uh, interpersonal gender-based violence or child exploitation, so forth. And you're fighting with them. You have this common cause to fight, whether it's from or you stand up for your principles and stand up for your principles as over your organization, and you live for other organizations. It might be revolutionary, but a different ideology, or they have the same people or like African organization, but they might be somewhat reformist, they might be more nationalist, and so forth. And you're fighting the game cause, but you're doing it to make sure that the that that you're sort of like giving them a choice of, okay, we know we have some different aspects of what we want to fight for, but we know there's something we don't like. So again, it's the understanding of the constant struggle. And one thing we spoke about earlier is that sometimes, whether it's from television or social media or just any part of capitalist media, that there's a point where if if you don't have the exact same ideology, if you don't have the exact same goal or some kind of purpose, that you can't get along with them, that you can't work with someone. And I think the United Front is a way to sort of combat that, to recognize where that they're working at their struggle and fight against that. And I think one great example is one thing we mentioned a couple of times is it's called the National Liberation Front, or what people might know as the Viet Cong. And let me see if I can put that up. So this is from a book called The Furtive War. We talk about the National Liberation Front. We'll have a session here. And one thing is that not only were Marxist Leninists involved in the struggle against French imperialism, against Japanese imperialism, against U.S. imperialism, you also had three main political parties took part The Democratic Party, born in 1945, is a party of intellectuals and small business people which supported the resistance war against the French from the beginning. The Radical Socialist Party, formed in 1961, represents intellectuals in Aegon and other urban centers and reflects a strong turn toward neutralism among intellectuals, even in the DM administration army. The People's Revolutionary Party, formed in December 1961, groups together foreign resistance members not affiliated to the other two parties. And as its name suggests, the latter is further to the left of the other two and represents the worker, peasant, militant intellectuals. So again, you have a group of varying revolutionary revolutionary ideologies. Some might be more some like slightly center left, and some more of a exercise point. But again, they all had the fact that they were fighting against French imperialism, and you see later on U.S. and Japanese imperialism. And you might see there's some other examples. You might think of some of the United Fronts in the early stages of the Russian Revolution. You might see right now the New People's Army, I think, in the Philippines. That's another United Front of unions and women's organizations, youth organizations, and so forth. And to go into more of the African United Front, something from mother ancestor Mary Baraka. He states, "We work every day to build organizations based on a specific ideology and value system, but it is the united front, on one hand, of avowed progressives and also of all possible ideological tendencies and positions. Must be energetically developed as the struggle continues to believe that even the united fronts are raised in their collective political consciousness, and those that cannot cohere in a positive political progressive united front will more and more be identified as eccentric tendencies or friends of imperialism." And later on, for this reason, a front tends to be more liberal than a party or a unitary ideologically cohesive cadre organization. More liberal in that no one given ideological political tendency should dominate the front, except over long periods of collective work and responsibility. More and more consensus will be reached that does not remove the participants moves too far from the ideological position on any given issue. The progressive, like the United Front, is the beginning of a true liberation movement, should be salvaged and developed at all costs. So again, it's talking about how they're unlike a party, like Jimmy mentioned with the Black Alliance for Peace. There's not, even though they people go to the website or look at anything from Black Alliance for Peace, they do have sort of like common tenets that you believe in, but if you look at individual organizations, it looks different. So again, it's all about making sure that you have that proper synthesis between recognizing that there are people who are organizing against the imperialist war machine, but they might have slightly different ideologies. So it's more effective to have groups that can communicate with each other, can plan militarily, and produce propaganda and so forth, than to just try to go by and say, I'm the true voice, or oh no, I'm the true voice. But again, I think that's what those 2 points are trying to progress throughout.
Are there similarities at all between a united front and a coalition?
There are. I think there are some similarities. I think one thing from research I've done is that united fronts tend to be a bit more. And I say, if you want to talk in more militant point of view, more of a defensive strategy that they try to defend some kind of game, then there's some kind of there are some kind of similarities between the two. I think if we think about for example, the Rainbow Coalition by our ancestor of Fred Hampton. I think even though they did have they're all fighting against the United Snakes, they have almost like differences, like the Black Panther Party versus the Black Panther Party versus the Young Patriots and the Young Lords and Brown Berets. or like students for a democratic society, even though they all had they had some similar, or American, like, even though they all had similar enemies, like it would be more so a united front if all of them had like all like similar, I'd say similar, kind of like national oppression. So like if it's all, let's say a national united front for more of a, if the focus more on a, on a national basis of Africans, or just looking, if it was more of like the structure was just on a class basis, then we focus on class, or we talk about or like a women's or gender front, then it'd be more on that. I think it might, of course, again, we're like on the best in mental space. So again, if there anything that I'm missing out, or right, objections, just let us know.
And to that point, we in the Oregon chapter, we would work with a lot of anti-fascist organizations who were mostly Europeans, even though Africans should be anti-fascist. That just comes with the whole thing. But working with anti-fascist organizations, working with indigenous-led organizations, working with folks who, as you're talking about, didn't necessarily have similar interests where Africa is not primary, but there may be similar class interests, or again, the anti-fascist element. But in terms of the African United Front, when we were working on opening the School of African Roots, we worked with the Nation of Islam, we worked with other organizations who ideologically didn't necessarily have the same objectives as us, but we all understood that African children are being disrespected in these institutions. And, our histories are not properly being taught, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what are some positive ways we can deal with this issue? And so that would definitely be a definition of that. And of course, Ancestor Kwame Ture, that he was extremely good at emphasizing the importance of united fronts. So when he came back to the US, he would always be at the Slave Theater, which is, I just always found that an interesting name for the theater. But I grew up in Bed-Stuy, always walked past the slave. And so he would always make a speech there, and he emphasized the importance. And working with various organizations, always saying join an organization. But again, we understood what the objectives were. So while Africa is being primary to us, it might be for you, we not necessarily even like Black business, but understanding that there's a means to get to liberation, and it is tied to Africa, even though it may not be primary, but you may go to Libya and understand the Pan-African struggle there. So Pan-African struggle is still a factor, I think, in African United Fronts. It may not be primary. So I think that's a huge factor in the difference. So there may be sort of people emphasizing racial analysis more. So it's just like, our Black children are not being educated right. So it's a united front on that. So on the surface, it looks like a single issue, but there's an underlying structure that there's something wrong. So while they're on, for instance, with NOI, they may not address imperialism, but they understand there is a root to why Africans are in the conditions we are, as opposed to, again, working with anti-fascist organizations. There might be a bigger emphasis on imperialism there, but there's different groups coming together that are not necessarily African. So I think that is, as you're mentioning, there are differences there. The class emphasis versus race analysis, so yeah, let's talk about Kwame Ture a little bit more. Let's stay there and talk about the importance of having united fronts. And again, doing a lot of this work in Oregon, I saw how crucial that was and seeing it in action. So when we did a lot of the community defense going on, just looking at how many organizations came out and supported, you're doing good work, and some people supported here, and then other, some supported in other ways. But looking at the need to build a school, looking at a need to have other community programs, looking at a need to emphasize political education, looking at a need to discuss how important organizing is. I think that's the root of what Kwame Ture was doing. So I don't know if you have any thoughts around that or anything that sticks out to you when it comes to Kwame Ture talking about unified fronts and developing them and maintaining them.
Oh, when you talk about another thing that came to mind as far as the differences is, even though it might not always be the case, but coalitions almost tend to be temporary. Like you have a coalition, you think, oh, we have different groups who want to achieve this goal. Okay, we achieve this goal, and you break away. Like you might, doesn't necessarily mean you stop talking to each other or even stop talking to each other or anything, but it certainly means that for us, like close connection and close communication might not work. Like you see that's with like bourgeois, like coalition governments. If you think like parliamentary governments, they have coalition governments. It's like, okay, we need our government we need our state apparatus to work. Which party wants to help? So,
the coalition of the willing.
Yes. And I think you and I have friends, as I said, they tend to be more of an ongoing thing that there is a goal to achieve some ideological thing, that even if the groups have different ideologies, that there is like a tendency to push forward towards a lot greater. So even like when if you've seen or heard anything from Kwame Ture, he talks about joining an organization, even though they're like fighting for justice for the people, that even though like he is like particular, even though he is like I mentioned about socialism and Pan-Africanism and African nationalism, that he also mentions, if you ever hear him, he talks about like if you've seen a short video of you might have seen it in one of our episodes about, like he talks about like how he's like these bad people, they're part of an organization. Like he talked about Martin Luther King started Christian Leadership Conference, certainly not revolutionary organization, or Garvey, UNA, certainly revolutionary organization. Certainly like obviously massive organization, and it was during the 20s, and only like Africans to have some pride in themselves or something. Like it certainly was, even though it somewhat anti-socialist, but certainly something where there is there was like of Africans returning, and might not be different from the IIG, African People's Revolution Party. You read from Kwame Nkrumah, and he took a lot of inspiration from Garvey and Book Marcus and Jack and Andrew Garvey from the UNA. So again, we go back to Ture, Kwame Ture, that he talked about organizations, and even though, as I said, even though he was speaking of like revolutionary organizations, he also meant organizations generally. And if you're able to do so and have organizations talk with each other, that's better than no organization. You could say you're ready you read all these books from Cabral, you read all this stuff about William Mandel, you read all this stuff from Kwame Ture or Walter Rodney and so forth. But if you're not for an organization, like the people who are down, like you see the people with the bow ties and the suits heading out final call, then they're part of the organization. They're doing the work, or someone getting a voter registration for the NAACP, or someone doing some survival programs for the People's Party or something like that. Hey, they're even if like the even if the ideology differs, the fact that they're organized for this is for the people, even if even if you think they're reformist or they think you're overly radical or something, but as long as you again you emphasize that you're working with the organization to help the people going forward, that's important. And I think if you want a couple of things from Ture himself, if you ever seen the documentary, multi-part documentary Eyes on the Prize, they have interviews with Ture. I think they might use stuff with Carmichael, but again, this is the question where he says he's describing a meeting with the interviewer asks us, could you talk about that meeting with the Black United Front? And he says, of course, before the Poor People's Campaign came into Washington, D.C., even the press started its stupidity, trying to post King and some of us in the city in direct opposition to each other. First Black United Front, which was organized in the country, was organized by SNCC people. I worked on that staff there in Washington, D.C. And that United Front was organized just before King came into Washington, D.C. for his Poor People's Campaign. I remember his advanced scouts with Jesse Jackson and Andrew Young. And when they came for the meeting, I explained to them that we had a United Front. That it would be easy if SCLC through Dr. King would just come and present the program. That would solve all problems. They were both rather sure that Dr. didn't have to come. This among themselves joking. I think it was Jesse who said, the Lord isn't coming to y'all. That's what we used to joke, just a joke. And I told him, well, I'm sure he's going to come. Well, of course, he had come to before the United Front and the United Front. We had all segments organizations from the NAACP. So again, he knew the importance. He knows the importance of even something organizations like SCLC or NAACP that this is before he helped organize the A-APRP. But even then, he knew that having organizations that might have the resources, but even if you're more radical, but you don't have the extent of resources that another organization has, being able to organize together while at the same time keeping your principles is a very useful thing as far as United Front, and that's something that as he's organized with the A-APRP, that he emphasized that and that's something I think that has to be kept in mind when you're doing your organizational work, that you might have to, but there's some points where you might have to work with organizations where, as they say, you at first you think, do I really want to work with them? They're too revisionists, they're too ultra, they're too reformist. Obviously you obviously have to take an analysis and see, sometimes working with another organization at some point might not work, but at the same time, depending on the conditions there, you have to realize that you'll definitely have to struggle, and I think that's one thing you in mind. Anything else? Another question in we talked about that meeting, and then if my memory serves me correctly, we talked about 20 years ago. I think that we did make a resolution, which in this resolution we assured Dr. King that no group which did not accept the philosophy of effective nonviolence around the Poor People's Campaign would in any way be associated with it. They could do things to help in the background with nothing to do with the conflict of their interests here, and they would be happy to support. Dr. King was extremely happy to find things to do. Achieved a great victory and was prepared to move on for People's Campaign. So again, there's sometimes you might have to, even if you think in a case, you believe that I said that war is, or a brother, a mutant, that war is politics with a gun, or with weapons, and if you might have to do something where you might have to be nonviolent. For a flip side, uh, with that line, nonviolence might have to do something that they do. But again, it's all about making sure you have that conversation. Because if you go into it and you just do different things and there's no communication, then that's where things fall apart. But again, it's understanding at what point as an organization do you at what point in the organization do you say, well, that's not ultimately what we want to do, or that's not ultimately technically, but we do think that there are gains to be won by following a thing. And then at some points you might have to say, you might have to think we have to be like a little more ideologically, but like form organizations that are more ideologically similar. So again, that's something you have to figure out.
And I want to sit with the importance of organization. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how people tend to not look at capitalism as organized. So usually for an organization to be sustainable or successful in some measure, you need the masses to collectively do that work to build the organization. So under capitalism, what happens is the masses that do the bulk of the work in order for capitalism to thrive. So either you perform wage slavery, either there's the prison industrial complex, there's, if you want to go with the traditional sweatshops, there's stealing of mines. So people are literally wrecking their health in order to mine minerals, in order to have devices or jewelry or whatever. So it's thriving because the masses are producing that labor in order for it to thrive. So thinking about it on the flip side, in order to defeat capitalism, it also needs a structure where the masses do that work and build capacity to do that. And yeah, as you were talking, I'm just really thinking that people don't think of it in that way, because people think of capitalism as a top-down structure usually, but it's still just like any revolutionary organizing, it's still bottom up, because it's the masses that continue to build that wealth for people to profit off of. And I think if we began to think of it in that way, I think thinking about merging organizations to have a unified front, I really do think it would make a lot more sense. Because as you know, you have if we're talking about even the Bandung conference, there are people coming from different countries, but there was an objective. And then on the flip side, the Berlin conference. So they were warring countries, but they had an objective and they unified on that objective. So if we romanticize this sort of top-down structure, when at the same time it is the masses building that structure to strengthen, whether or not we're willingly doing it, that's another conversation. But the fact is, organization is built by the masses, whether or not it's something that's humanistic. And we really have to start thinking of it in that way. And we have to think of building united fronts, African or not. We're talking about African united fronts in this episode, but building a united front to create a better society, a better world, a better system that is humanistic. Everything has to happen through the masses. It has to happen through the bottom up. So I was really thinking about that as you were talking about organizing, and even how organized capitalism is. It still takes the masses to build that structure. Because if everyone were to quit their job, like capitalism, I mean, obviously it would still be here. It's on its last leg because it's heavily organized, but it would be a lot harder to get its grounding, because it would just be crumbling. So just think about that. Like, it takes the masses to build any organized system. So yeah, I just really wanted to put that out there.
Exactly. And as we saw during the like the shutdown during COVID-19 pandemic, that they're like during the pandemic, that to the extent of how much, and you'll be seeing this now, like how much the economy had, like how much of productivity just like drop all of a sudden. And it required a lot of people to say, okay, I can't, like either from even management down saying, okay, you're not going to work, or people, or as you see, the so-called great resignation of people saying, okay, I don't want to work, like I found something else to do. But of course, since you don't have the extent, like, even though there are organizations fighting for justice, but because you don't have it to the extent, like to a large extent, you have compared to the like the organization of capital, that instead of having it where instead of having to more of a so but you're having to a socialist economy, you simply see the capitalists just going from one stage of capitalism to another. If you heard about the fourth industrial revolution, if you hear about the Great Reset, you might think, oh, this is just people talking about conspiracy theory of this and blah. But like, again, like they're organized. They're trying to see, like they see it, like they're using an opportunity to say, okay, how can we, they recognize that a lot of people, whether they're in the periphery or country or within nations, they're upset about, they're pissed off about what, like the fact that wealth has shot up to them, and they just trying to figure, okay, how can we keep this system going? And that's what they're doing. So again, that's what's important about this. Like, in general, imagine if the miners in the Congo, or the top workers in Bangladesh, or the all the peasant workers in Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire, or coffee or the tea, people taking tea in Ethiopia, or in coffee in Brazil, or making fruit in Central America, or making tech pieces in the Philippines. So if they also want to strike, they just say, okay, we had enough. We're not making stuff for y'all. And that was that will wake them up. And if you're seeing the militant unions, or people doing people's war, or people like rejecting, and like French, US, China, and so forth, you see Africans on the continent say, like, we're done with it, and so they need to rely on colonists, either within the bureaucracy or in the military, to try to stamp it out before that organization goes up to, or there is that expropriation from the massive imperialists. And so, again, if we talk about making sure that Africa is producing for Africans both on the continent and abroad, you have to have a price to make sure that it's not just merely begging for which imperialist nation or semi-imperialist nation gives your micro-national group or something, like the best piece of pie. It's about making sure that the masses of Africans are benefiting wealth and having the power to decide their own fate, instead of relying on the stock markets of other countries, or of the operators who've been ruling them for 20, 30, 40 years. So you have to promise on that front that even if it's a they say if it's a peasant organization, or so it has to pick up a peasant organization with a militant women's organization, or organization, like union, like a militant union, or a communist party, or really the progressive party, so forth. You have that power to unify and say, we're done with the imperialists, we're done with the neocolonists, we're done with the settler colonists, and that's something you have to work on. And instead of saying, instead of having these ideas where left over from imperialists, from colonization, from like long history of slavery, and just continuing of like taking pieces and separating you and doing this something that has to really back in people's minds of Africans.
What would be some effective tools to build united fronts between home, Africa, and the diaspora?
I think that's one of the main benefits of this of the internet age, that you have the ability to, like we've talked with organizations, both ourselves and with like the A-APRP in general, organizations on the continent who are doing work and just keeping track of making sure. And as we said at the beginning, like a big part is like making sure that we're listening to each other, that understand that even if what you're facing, what Africans are facing in Albania, or what Africans are facing in the Sudan or in Ghana, or it might look a little different than what you're facing in the little ghettos or in neo colonies here in the Snake. That we're facing the same enemy, and understanding like where that if there are differences, you offer, you learn from them, and create those understanding of what things you have in common, and taking those commonalities and saying, okay, what ways can it help? It might be something as simple as sending money over. It might be something that's like printing out flyers, or use social media, or some kind of communication, and seeing how that can build. And then if they work with one organization, they might be other, like we work with other organizations ourselves, like Black Lives Peace. I'm also oriented to the Malcolm X Resolution movement. It might be from another organization that might have something where they might offer some material sharing with you. So, and I think it's definitely something that you have to keep in mind. And I know this something that I mentioned, and I think that's like fairly popular among in the spaces of act locally and globally. And I do think that is true, that it certainly helps to make sure that you're organized with people that are your community. Again, like sometimes you might see that the community you're in might not necessarily be the community you want to organize with, or there might be some total differences. But at the same time, so in that case, you might have to act in the community somewhere else. They would going back home, and if you're able to build that in a way that will definitely help in that drive towards Pan-Africanism.
And I think the united front between the diaspora and Africa would be important as well, due to any language differences. You may have the same objectives, but not everyone speaks the same language. There's also embargoes that happen, so people may have electrical or technological outages. There might be a reduction or lack of Wi-Fi in particular cities or towns. People may not have access to a full library with a lot of the books. So sharing a lot of those resources in a situation where there's a united front is also beneficial. So there's just so many reasons to have a united front with a particular objective of liberating African people and creating liberated zones. The more of us who do it, the farther we can get to that objective of having liberated zones. So I think that is definitely one of the things Kwame Ture is talking about in the creation of having this process of building African united fronts. Yeah, I mean, his role was to get the diaspora to either join the A-APRP or just to build revolutionary organizations to encourage people to do that. But I think ultimately his role was also building between Africa itself and not just the snakes, but the Caribbean, but all over the world. And there were several people that really did put forth the work to do that. I think Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz was another person. There were so many people. And you mentioned Mama Zondeni Sobukwe. Not a lot of people know who she was. And not a lot of people even know who Robert Sobukwe is, fortunately, or was. But just the work so many people did in that struggle against legalized apartheid in Tanzania, the struggle, the blood, the sweat, the tears that people produce in order to free African people. It needs to be recognized in the fact that there were united fronts to spread awareness in terms of boycott, divestments, and sanctions in terms of this issue. So when we talk about the BDS movement with Palestine, it's also related to what happened in Tanzania. We have to make those connections. So having united fronts, having coalitions around these issues, I think is very positive. And so if it wasn't for, if it wasn't for cultural workers, if it wasn't for folks who were on the front lines of the struggle to cross those lines, if you will, across the seas, just producing what an example of a united front is, then you and I might not even be sitting here discussing the importance of them. So we have to honor that work our ancestors did. We have to honor the work that Kwame Ture did. And he was, not in the best of physical health, but he had an understanding this work was important. To talk about, we can't just sit here and be a passive listener. We have to be an active organizer. And we definitely every week, of course, encourage everyone to not be a passive listener, but to be an active organizer. And I know, the more we do this podcast, the more we connect with other folks. There's the BAP connection. There's, folks who have joined the A-APRP. So I think this work is really important. And Kwame Ture actually somehow was the one link for a lot of people. They may have utilized the internet and search for, okay, I know that there's a problem, and Kwame Ture comes up. So, it's the dialectics of the internet. It can be used for something positive, but just making those connections and looking at that and having an understanding. But now we have to move further to not work as an individual organization, but understand it takes the masses to create positive change and change itself. So how do we do that? Through formulating unified African fronts or African unified. But so yeah, I just think that, as you're talking about, people think, because that's how we're trained, that we have to think alike in order to produce results. And that's impossible, because even under capitalism, when we go to these jobs, we work with people that have so many different belief systems, and yet the job gets done because there's an investment in that job to get done. So why wouldn't there be the same emphasis, the same investment in getting the job done for our liberation? We don't have to think like someone else and be like, well, they're a little bit too radical. They're talking about abolishing the police. I just want to, defund them. It's okay, it's like, but we understand that the police, they're a problem. So what are we going to do about it? We may be on different ends of the spectrum, but we understand it's a problem. So how can we work on some level together to address this problem? So we have our organization here, you have yours there, but we can come together and figure it out. And we have our objectives, we have our plans. And again, it takes all sorts of people to address the problem and to not just reduce the problem, but eliminate the problem. If we're just romanticizing that everything has to be perfect or else, we're not going to get rid of the problem. So it's important that we address unified fronts like everything else dialectically, looking at positives and negatives, right? But understanding the positives outweigh the negatives when it comes to formulating unified fronts. So just like we were talking about earlier, when it comes to mental health, like don't be afraid to step out and say, okay, I know that I think differently than you. I have a different spiritual belief than you, whatever it is. Like, I'm struggling, and you told me you were trans. I'm kind of struggling with that. However, I know that there is an issue with trans folks dying, like, because we're all dying at the hands of the state. So what makes trans folks dying at the hands of the state any different than cis people? So there's a problem. So understanding that there's a problem, figuring out what that is, and formulating a plan. And part of that plan is through the United Front. So yeah, we shouldn't worry too much about it. And part of organizing is also making a ton of mistakes. So even going to someone, someone's like, hey, this is what I need. It's okay if mistakes are made, and somebody can say, hey, again, this is what I need, and we'll work on that. That's part of the criticism, self-criticism process. Like, how can I be better? How can we be better? Because none of us are perfect. And the process of having and building a united front is not going to be perfect, especially because not everyone agrees on what the objective should be. But again, everyone is building a united front because they understand what the problem is. So if we can even just come together on that, the rest will work itself out. So, I feel very positive about that. And just in the experience of organizing in the A-APRP, I know that it works. I know absolutely that it works. So
yeah, and as you say, okay, I think that's another thing is like how, like, to what extent that this is like, I know I've looked at like this fear of like not being perfect, but you have to like, you must like, it's like this weird like dialectic of especially here in the snakes of like people like overcome it, like the whole like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, the whole like American dream thing that like of like you're able, whether you're born in the snakes or you're immigrating to it, that you're able to just come up and succeed. At the same time, and in that case, it always involves some struggle. At the same time, if you somehow deviate, you get sanctioned by the capitalist state with the state, and again, like trying to overcoming that, like any dialectic is something that I understand. Like there's sometimes when another part of the United Front is even like is that as we mentioned, that we understand that masses are the makers of history. It's not just a matter of one great hero or a few great heroes that are like leading the heroic charge to forward. Like this, and sometimes like the masses might have something where there is like that's like anti people. There's always something else at one point. Do you in the United Front that you do want to have the masses involved as much as possible? At the same time, you don't want as we said before, you want to make sure there is a principle there, that it's not just a matter of, if I think in Maoist or Marxist terms they call tailism, that you don't just want to follow the masses just because, like, if like 90% of the masses say execute like 100,000 people just because they're they're trans or because they're women or something like that. Like, do you fall back on that? No. Like you do want, again, you don't want some principles to make sure that you take it. At the same time, you have to understand that there will be some differences, and you want to make sure that organization you understand the dialect. They understand that things will change. That even if something might be right now, like doing it again with the same United Front might change to something different. And you might know what change the material conditions of that change. Sometimes it might be something that's can quantum change. So it's something you just have to get where it's on, make the analysis and understand what favorite system you have. You do that.
Do you have any last words before we end this episode about building united fronts?
I think last word is just like with anything, understand that history, like what I mentioned earlier about the National Liberation Front in Vietnam. Understand how it worked. Or think about the Black United Front. Or you think this is the National Black United Front here in this organization of states. You study what they're doing or join that organization and also understand. One thing we're talking about, we're dialectical and historical materials. So one thing is understanding like how the material conditions led to the formation of those fronts, and seeing how that what successes came from them, what the things they fell short on, and you work on that for what you're doing, and see how sometimes sometimes they might be a united front, but then organisms still like go off and do different things. They might or they might be too they incorporate the masses, but they do that tailism thing that was mentioned, or the flip side, they might be overly hierarchical and doing something and not consult the masses. So always understand that history and see how you can. I know one thing that we're doing in our work study is that like sometimes one thing that might be tough is understanding what organizations are out there. So like find out what organizations are out there. You think, oh, I got this great idea. The organization, but there might be 3-4 organizations that are already doing it. So yeah, you might come up with an organization that might work out well, but at the same time, maybe you can find what they're doing, and some organizations, are doing the same thing, but they don't know each other, or they will work to the same extent. But if they will together, find a front that will make that be closer, and so forth, and just understand that.
Yes. And speaking of being united on the issue of Pan-Africanism, we have a bunch of our comrades doing this work in terms of political education on the internet. So we have the Forward Ever podcast, which is on Spotify. We have Revolutionary African Women the last Saturday of the month. We have our Ancestors' Voices, which they're actually talking about the Irish Republican Socialists and unifying the Irish Republican Socialist struggle. And that is on Sundays. And that's, you catch that on YouTube if you don't catch the live stream. And then there is, I guess, did they change the name yet? What is the bi-weekly, currently Pan-African News? And those are our comrades in the Tiwa Territory chapter or New Mexico chapter. So those are some of the political education programs via the internet that you can listen to or watch, including Pantsula Podcast. And of course, there's Black Agenda Report, there's Black Alliance for Peace, there's Black Power Media, there's a lot we can catch. So, and a lot of us connect through that way. And I've seen people make decisions to join organizations through those mediums. So I think it is a really good thing this is going on. And thank you for joining an organization. Thank you in advance for those who are going to join an organization after listening to this episode and other episodes. And I want to thank you, Evan, and for building and organizing and listening and being a comrade. And I don't know, you have anything else?
Yeah, and also got recharge. There's also recharge colonialism, and also like few other African or comrade organizations who either sharing media or doing the work that you find out. And yeah, and just thank you. It was a great comrade too. And, yeah, we're working the best we can. So
Absolutely. Forward ever, backwards never.
forward.